follow up a little bit more on financial services, because I was looking at the FT this morning, this comment by Andrew Bailey, the FCA chief executive, who has been sounding some alarm bells about financial services trade, particularly in the Brexit environment. Can I just say it is very refreshing and useful to have a panel of experts. I know experts get denigrated quite a lot in British politics, but it's very useful to be guided by the evidence on this particular issue. When it comes to the services sector, am I right in thinking 83% of jobs in the UK are services sector, 26 million people? There's one estimate that our services exports are around somewhere even up towards 71% of our exports have a services component. One estimate is between 45% pure services and up to 71%. Can I just get a quick fire question to each of you? In your professional expert opinion, what impact is Brexit going to have on our services jobs to our core markets that we have? Is it going to be helpful in terms of services jobs for our core markets, or is it going to be harmful for services trade? If I can just get a quick assessment from each of you.
Well, if I may start, I think the services is obviously a key pillar of the UK economy. As you said, 80% comes from services sector, and also in trade. In 2017, UK recorded overall trade deficit with EU of minus 67 billion. But a surplus of 28 billion in trade and services was outweighed by a deficit of 95 billion in trade and goods. And it's also overall pattern of UK trade is that it has more surplus in services and has a deficit in trade and goods. So obviously, and the key sectors that are very much relevant to UK services export are the financial services, pensions, insurance, which for the UK export to EU accounts for about 40%. And one of the key things, I think, is to maintain the same conditions, or try at least the best to maintain the same conditions that the company used to have before the Brexit scenario. And one of the key issues there is passporting, which I think was said that around 5,000 companies operate on passporting rights. And how to keep that right is going to be a quite challenging issue.
But on balance, helpful or harmful to services trade?
Well, depends on the conditions that you will get
What's your
with the UK.
What's your professional judgment?
I think you probably have new opportunities in other markets where UK would have more freedom to negotiate terms. But with the EU, I think probably it's going to be negatively impacted.
Quickly, we should go down the line. Dmitry?
Sure. So to give you the answer I think you might be fishing for, I think it's the EU single market is an unprecedented level of services access. The EU is the nearest and richest neighbour the UK has. Pulling out of that and getting anything short of that, and frankly, in my professional experience, short of remaining in the single market, whatever the UK ends up negotiating will probably fall well short of that. I don't think I'm out on the fringes of trade commentary when I suggest that. Will be incredibly difficult to compensate for with FTAs with other countries, including really large ones like the US, China, India, simply because services components in FTAs just don't tend to be that ambitious compared to regional integration. I think it's just simply a numbers game. Proximity applies, market size applies, and the single market is just such a huge level of access you'll be losing.
That's harmful then?
It's not great. The one caveat I would say, just to balance that, the one caveat is people get very excited when you quote figures like 83% of the UK economy is services. The vast overwhelming majority of that is people selling services to one another.
What's the lowest level an economy has in services? I mean,
economies with very large resource components. So something like a Saudi Arabia is probably, I don't know what the numbers are offhand, but I would suspect
that would be an outlier.
Unless you're selling a vast amount of a natural resource, you're probably somewhere in the kind of 60s to 80s.
Or or manufacturing, like China, used to be below 50%, but now the services has also picked up in recent years, and now I think it's 50-60%.
I just
Yes,
want
indeed,
to
yeah.
keep going down the line. Brexit, helpful or harmful services. No.
What he said, I mean, it all depends on what type of Brexit, right? Most of the UK's exports, at least almost half of them, end up in the EU single market. It's logical to conclude that any move which would create further obstacles to trade with that market would be a problem. So, yeah.
Well, we haven't received any instructions as to how blunt or not are we supposed to be, but if I am open, so my personal sentimental view is harmful. It will be harmful, because I'm pro-European. My professional expert opinion would be that, again, it depends. So, for example, it will depend on the agreement, on the trade agreement that you're going to have with the EU, and whether, for instance, you will abide by the Services Directive. So take, for example, the EU-Switzerland agreement. There, the Swiss delegation obviously wanted desperately a service agreement, but the EU was not willing to give it. The EU gave only what it wanted, which was free movement of natural persons. So service providers, but individual service providers. So independent service providers, right? So again, it will depend on what type of leverage, let's say, there will be on the negotiating table and what we're going to get. At the same time, let me say this because it is important. Much of the trading services within that the EU does is intra-EU, with one exception, as far as I recall, and if there are economists in the room, they can correct me. The UK, 60% of the UK trade is actually extra-EU. So this means actually that for the UK, if there is one country, if you like, within the EU that probably has better chances than the others to survive outside the EU, is actually the UK.